He saw a woman at the gate pulling a carry-on. He saw a boarding pass in one hand and a coffee in the other. He saw a black woman moving through an airport terminal, the way everyone moves through an airport terminal, quickly, purposefully, with the particular focused energy of someone who has a flight to catch. What Officer Dale Connors did not see was the credential wallet in the interior pocket of her blazer, or the federal shield tucked behind the first card in it. What he did not see was the name on the boarding pass, not the destination, but the title printed above the surname in the passenger manifest. The one that the gate agent was reading right now, 200 feet away, with an expression that was changing rapidly. And what he could not have known, because he had not thought to ask and would not have known where to begin, was that the woman he had just pulled out of a boarding line and walked to a side room had spent the last 11 years investigating exactly this kind of thing, and that she was already, with the calm patience of a professional, composing her report in her head. He thought he was doing his job. He was becoming her next case file. Harwell-Denton International Airport serves the greater Clement metropolitan area in central Tennessee, handling roughly 14 million passengers annually across 2 concourses and 38 gates. It is not a small airport, and it is not a large one. It is the kind of airport that moves efficiently when things go right and creates a particular kind of pressure when they do not, because the margins between connection windows are tight and the staff gate agents, security personnel, concourse officers, have learned to operate with a certain briskness that can, in the wrong hands, tip into something harder to defend. On a Thursday morning in February, the airport was running at normal capacity for a weekday. The 7:45 departure banks were boarding across 3 gates in Concourse B. The security checkpoint at the B entrance had processed its morning rush without incident. The food court near Gate B12 was doing the business that airport food courts do at 7:15. Harried travelers with paper cups and the look of people calculating how much time they have to exist as human beings before becoming cargo. Diane Osei was 47 years old. She was a special agent in charge with the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General, the division responsible for investigating misconduct, corruption, and civil rights violations within DHS itself and its component agencies, which include Customs and Border Protection, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and the Transportation Security Administration. She had held the role for 4 years, having spent the 7 years before that as a senior special agent in the same office. She had opened or supervised the opening of 231 investigations in 11 years. 44 of them had resulted in federal criminal charges. 18 had resulted in the termination of federal law enforcement officers. She knew the inside of airports the way a carpenter knows wood grain. She had worked cases in 8 of them. She was traveling to Washington, D.C. for a 2-day interagency conference on federal civil rights enforcement, a conference at which she was scheduled to present on the second afternoon. Her presentation titled Documented Patterns in Discriminatory Enforcement, a Case Review. Her laptop bag contained the presentation, the supporting data, and a draft report that she intended to review on the flight. Her carry-on contained 2 days of clothes, a toiletry bag, and a book she had been trying to finish for 6 weeks. She had cleared security at 6:58. She had a cup of black coffee from the concourse kiosk. She was walking toward Gate B17, where the 7:45 to Reagan National was already in final boarding, when Officer Dale Connors stepped into her path. Connors was a contracted security officer employed by Harwell-Denton through a private security firm called Meridian Protective Services, which held the airport's landside security contract. He was 32 years old, 18 months into the role, and he operated with the specific confidence of a man who has been given a uniform and an authority he has not fully examined. His duties were landside, baggage claim, ticketing, public concourse, and did not extend to the secure gate area, which falls under TSA jurisdiction. He was, at 7:22 in the morning, standing approximately 40 feet outside the boundary of his operational authority, which he had either not consulted or not considered. He had been watching Diane from the food court. He had watched her pay for her coffee, pick up her bag, and begin walking toward the gate. He had formed a view. He had acted on it. "Ma'am," he stepped directly into her path. "Can I see your boarding pass and ID?" Diane stopped. She looked at his uniform, the Meridian logo, the security officer designation, not the TSA insignia, not a police badge, and she conducted in the space of approximately 2 seconds. the professional assessment that 11 years of federal law enforcement had made automatic. She noted his position relative to the secure boundary. She noted the absence of any TSA agent in his immediate vicinity. She noted the two other passengers who had walked past this same point in the last 30 seconds without being stopped. "May I ask why?" she said. "Random security check." "This is a sterile concourse. Random security checks are TSA's jurisdiction." "What's your role here?" His expression shifted in the way that expressions shift when a person has been asked a question they are not accustomed to being asked. "I'm security. I need to see your boarding pass." Diane looked at the gate. The agent at B-17 was making the final boarding call. She had approximately 4 minutes. "I have a flight to catch," she said. "If TSA would like to conduct a secondary screening, I am happy to cooperate with TSA. You are a Meridian officer. Your authority does not extend to the sterile area. I'm asking you to come with me. I am not going to miss my flight for a security check that you do not have the authority to conduct." Connors took a step closer. He was taller than Diane by perhaps 6 inches, and he was using the height the way certain people use it, as punctuation for an argument that isn't working. "This isn't optional, ma'am. If I am being detained, I need the legal basis. Come with me." He reached for her arm. Diane set her coffee down on the nearest surface, a trash receptacle ledge with the precise, deliberate care of someone who has decided that what is about to happen is going to be fully documented and that nothing in her own behavior is going to provide any ambiguity about the record. She did not pull away. She looked at his hand on her arm. She looked at the camera mounted on the pillar 8 feet to her left, which she had noted when she walked through this section of the concourse. "I am complying under protest," she said, clearly at a volume sufficient for the 2 passengers nearby to hear. "I want your full name and employee number. I want to know the specific basis for this detention. And I want to inform you that I am a federal law enforcement officer." "Sure you are?" He said it the way people say things they do not believe. He walked her toward a side corridor marked security personnel only and opened the door. Diane walked through it. At gate B-17, the final boarding call finished. The gate agent, a woman named Keisha, who had been with the airline for 7 years, looked at the manifest. There was one passenger unaccounted for. She looked at the name. She looked at the title above it. She picked up the gate phone. The side corridor led to a holding room, a plain, fluorescent-lit space with 2 chairs, a table, and a wall-mounted camera in the upper right corner that Diane noted the moment she entered. It was the kind of room she had been in before, from the other side of the table. She sat down without being asked. She placed her laptop bag on the table in front of her carry-on beside the chair, and her hands visible on the table surface. She looked at Connors. "Your name and employee number," she said. He gave her the name. He did not give her the employee number. "Who is your supervisor on shift this morning?" He told her that wasn't relevant. "I'd like you to contact your supervisor. I'll decide when that's necessary." Diane looked at him for a moment. She had a very specific look that she had developed over 11 years of conducting interviews. Not hostile, not warm, entirely attentive. The look of a person who is listening to everything being said and everything being left unsaid and is organizing both into a structure that will eventually be written down and reviewed by people with the authority to act on it. It was, in her professional assessment, not a look that most people found comfortable to sit across from. Connors did not find it comfortable. He busied himself with a clipboard that he had retrieved from the wall. "Reason for travel?" he asked. "Federal business." "Where are you going?" "Washington." "Who are you traveling with?" "Alone." "What is your occupation?" Diane reached into her blazer and placed the credential wallet on the table. She opened it and turned it to face him. The federal shield was on the left side. Her identification card was on the right. The issuing agency was printed in block letters above the photograph. Department of Homeland Security, Office of Inspector General. Her title was printed below the photograph. Special Agent in Charge. Connors looked at it. He looked at it for a longer time than it took to read it. "I'm going to need to verify this," he said. "You are welcome to verify it," Diane said. "The OIG duty line is listed on the card. I would also suggest, while you have your supervisor on the phone, that you ask them to review the jurisdictional boundary of your operating area, because the location at which you stopped me is approximately 40 feet inside TSA's sterile perimeter, which is outside the scope of your contractual authority." She paused. "And I am now going to be late for my flight, which means I will need to be rebooked, which means I will miss the morning session of the conference I am attending, which means I have time this morning that I did not previously have. I intend to use it to document this interaction fully. I would encourage you to contact your supervisor now. Connors left the room. He was gone for 4 minutes. During those 4 minutes, the following things happened in the public concourse outside. The gate agent Keisha had placed her call. The person she called was not her airline supervisor, but the TSA's supervisory transportation security officer, on duty at the B checkpoint, a woman named Lieutenant Carla Mensah. Keisha had told Mensah that a passenger flagged in the system as federal law enforcement had not boarded her flight, and that the last time Keisha had seen that passenger, she had been walking with a Meridian officer toward the side corridor near Gate B14. Lieutenant Mensah had looked at the manifest flag. She had looked at the title. She had said, "Hold the aircraft," and had begun walking from the checkpoint toward the corridor at a pace that was not quite running. She arrived at the holding room door 37 seconds after Connors had closed it, accompanied by a TSA supervisory agent named Officer Reyes and by the airport's director of security operations, a man named Frank Ashby, who had been paged by Mensah's supervisor and who had been in the building since 6:30 and was now moving through the concourse with the expression of a man reviewing, in real time, a significant professional liability. Lieutenant Mensah opened the door. She looked at Diane. She looked at the credential wallet on the table. She looked at the empty chair across from Diane, which Connors had vacated. "Agent Osei," she said, "I am deeply sorry. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Diane said. "Where is Officer Connors?" "He's in the corridor. Please ask him to come back in." Connors came back in. He stood near the door. He had the look of a man who, upon leaving the room to contact his supervisor, had made the contact and had received information that had substantially altered his understanding of the situation he was in. His supervisor had verified the credential before he finished describing it. His supervisor had then done what supervisors do when the person their employee has detained turns out to be a senior federal investigator from the agency whose mandate includes investigating exactly this kind of conduct. She had told him to go back to the room and not say anything else until she arrived. He was following that instruction. Lieutenant Mensah looked at Diane. "The 745 has been held at the gate. We can get you on it if you want to go now." Diane looked at Connors. She looked at Ashby. She looked at Mensah. "I want to complete a statement before I board," she said. "It will take approximately 15 minutes. I want Officer Connors, Director Ashby, and your supervisor in this room while I give it. I want the wall camera footage from the concourse between Gate B12 and Gate B17, preserved from 6:55 to 7:25 this morning. The footage from this room, preserved from the point of entry. And I want Officer Connors' employee record pulled before I leave the building." She looked at Ashby directly. "Do you understand?" Ashby said, "Yes, ma'am." Connors said nothing. The aircraft held at Gate B17 for 19 minutes. It departed 22 minutes late, which required a revised slot at Reagan National and a notation in the airline's operational log. On the manifest, seat 14C, Diane Osei's assigned seat, was occupied. She had boarded 11 minutes after she completed her statement, walking down the jetway with her laptop bag over one shoulder and her carry-on trailing behind her. Her blazer straight, her pace unhurried. She used the flight time to review her presentation. She made 2 additions to the section on jurisdictional overreach, which she thought now carried more concrete illustrative weight than it had the day before. She landed at Reagan National at 11:47. She was at the conference hotel by 12:30. She attended the afternoon sessions. Over dinner, she mentioned to a colleague from the Civil Rights Division, a woman she had worked with for 6 years, that she had had an incident at the airport that morning. Her colleague asked for the broad strokes. Diane gave them. Her colleague then asked the question that lawyers ask when they hear a thing described precisely. "Did you document it before you boarded?" "I gave a full statement," Diane said, "and the footage was preserved." Her colleague raised her glass. "Then it already exists," she said. "You just have to let the process work." Diane had spent 11 years building the process. She understood what it could and could not do. She drank her water and let the conversation move to other things. The formal complaint was submitted through DHS-OIG's internal reporting system at 6:42 the following morning, while Diane was in her hotel room before the first session of the day. It was assigned to a separate investigative team, within the office standard protocol when the complainant is a senior agent, to maintain independence, and a preliminary review was opened before 9 o'clock. The preliminary review moved quickly because the documentation was unusually complete. The Concourse camera footage was preserved. The holding room camera footage was preserved. Connors's employee record, which Ashby had pulled and forwarded to Mensa's supervisor the same morning, showed a prior incident from 9 months earlier. A complaint from a black male passenger whom Connors had removed from a concourse queue, again, in an area outside his jurisdictional boundary, for reasons that the complaint described as no stated cause. That complaint had been filed with Meridian's HR department. It had been reviewed. It had been closed with the finding that the officer had acted within the range of acceptable discretion. It had not been forwarded to TSA. It had not been forwarded to the airport authority. It had not been forwarded to anyone outside Meridian. The preliminary review team contacted Meridian's corporate compliance office on the second day. Meridian's compliance officer received the call, reviewed the documentation that the team summarized, and called the company's legal counsel, who reviewed the same documentation and recommended full cooperation. The full cooperation recommendation was partly principled and partly practical, in the specific ratio that legal counsel recommendations tend to reflect when the documentation is as clean as this documentation was. On the fourth day, the preliminary review was upgraded to a formal OIG investigation. The scope was expanded beyond the Connors incident to examine Meridian's prior complaint handling procedures at Harwell-Denton and to assess whether the 9-month-old complaint's non-disclosure represented a systemic failure or an isolated one. It was not an isolated one. The investigation found 2 additional complaints against Meridian officers at the same airport over a 3-year period, both involving non-white passengers stopped in areas where Meridian's jurisdictional authority was, at minimum, contested. Neither had been disclosed to TSA or the airport authority. All 3 had been reviewed and closed internally, using a process that the investigation found to be insufficiently independent, inadequately documented, and structurally incapable of identifying the kind of pattern that 3 complaints across 3 years would have revealed if examined together. The investigation's findings were issued 8 weeks after the incident. They cited Connors individually for conducting a detention outside his authorized operational area, for failing to produce his employee identification number upon request, from a detainee asserting federal law enforcement status, and for conduct consistent with discriminatory enforcement in violation of federal civil rights law. They cited Meridian Protective Services as an institution for its complaint handling procedures, its failure to disclose prior complaints to the contracting authority, and its failure to implement corrective measures after the first documented incident. The recommended remedies were specific and binding. Connors's employment was terminated. Meridian was required to implement an independent complaint review process audited annually by a third party, mandatory civil rights training for all deployed officers, and a disclosure protocol requiring any use of force or detention complaint to be reported to TSA and the airport authority within 48 hours. Harwell-Denton Airport Authority was required to incorporate those disclosure requirements into Meridian's contract, with termination for cause provisions if the requirements were not met. The airport authority's director signed the amended contract on a Monday morning without requesting additional time to review it. He had read the investigation findings over the weekend, and the one thing he had not been uncertain about, reading them, was how quickly he wanted the amended contract signed. Diane Osei presented at the conference on Friday afternoon. The session was attended by approximately 90 federal law, enforcement, and civil rights professionals, and it ran for 50 minutes, 40 a presentation, 10 of questions. Her final section, Recent Illustrative Cases, had been updated since she drafted it on the flight down. She did not name herself, because that was not the point. She described the category of incident: private security officer, sterile airport concourse, detention outside jurisdictional authority, pattern of prior complaints undisclosed to the contracting agency, and she walked through the documentation methodology and the investigative framework that the team had and applied. She noted that the case had moved from initial complaint to formal findings in 8 weeks, which was faster than average for this category. A colleague in the third row asked what had made the difference. Diane thought about it for a moment. She said that the documentation was complete from the first minute, because the person detained had known in real time exactly what to document and how. She said that the holding room camera had been running throughout, because the person detained had noted it upon entry and had conducted herself with the understanding that everything in the room was on record. And she said that the prior complaint had been found because the investigation had known to look for it. not because it had been disclosed voluntarily. Which is why disclosure requirements enforced by contracting authority are more reliable than voluntary internal review. She paused. The case is useful, she said, because the documentation is clean. But the documentation is clean because of choices made in the room, in the moment, by a person who understood that the record is not something that happens to you. It is something you make. You make it with your composure. You make it with your precision. You make it with the decision to stay completely visible and completely accountable. Even when, especially when, the person across the table from you is counting on you not to. She looked at the room for a moment. That is what makes it possible to hold them to account, she said. Not afterward. In the moment the record starts there. She advanced to her final slide. Dale Connors had believed, for 18 months, that the uniform resolved the equation, that wearing it was sufficient justification for the decisions made inside it. He had learned this belief not from any single instruction, but from the accumulated experience of operating in an environment where the decisions had not been examined, where the complaints had not been escalated, where the pattern had not been assembled because no one with the authority to assemble it had looked. He had stopped the wrong person to confirm the belief. The person he stopped had spent 11 years learning that beliefs of this kind do not survive documentation. They survive only in the absence of it, in the space between a complaint filed and a complaint reviewed, between an incident recorded and an incident examined, between a pattern recognized and a pattern acted upon. Diane Osei closed that space in the time it took to set down a coffee cup and place both hands on a table. The rest was process. The process worked. If this story reminded you that the record starts in the room, that composure under pressure is the most precise instrument a person can carry, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Hit the like button and subscribe. So you are here, and next time the process works the way it should, it always starts the same way. Someone refuses to be invisible.